Hello everyone, I'm coming for a new episode of High Vibe Monday on the podcast and on YouTube. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to trust your intuition. And the first thing I'm going to say is trusting your intuition is hard. And I thought that's never something I would say because I like things to be easy and effortless. And I do believe actually that intuition can make your life easy and effortless. But to trust your intuition is actually one of the hardest things to do. But it's going to be so much worth it. I really encourage you to stick with it. So why is it so hard to trust your intuition? Well, if you're anything like me, when you were a kid, you were constantly told off for what your intuition was telling you. So you would be hearing things like, don't be silly, you're too sensitive, what a whole lot of nonsense. I'm warning you, you're making a big mistake. You would have heard, I wouldn't do that if I were you, or you would have heard even, you're mad. Okay? These are the things that we hear when we follow our intuition, because the intuition that we get most of the time does not make any sense. It sounds irrational, it sounds emotional, and we live in a society that doesn't value. And in effect, intuition is not irrational. It's just that the mind, as we used to think, does not cater for it. It's like two opposites on the spectrum. On the one hand, you have the logic, going from A to B, and you have all the steps. And this is actually quite interesting because this is the journey I've been on. I was a lawyer where everything was very logical, very rational, and then imagination. No, it's not our imagination. It's intuition. Our intuition doesn't follow a step from A to B. It will tell you, go here and go there, and it won't make sense at all, and you have to just trust it. The other thing that we do is that we ask our intuition to give us some proof before we act on it or before we trust it. And with intuition, this is not how it works. You have to commit first. You have to take that leap of faith, and only when you do will you have the evidence or the proof. And you don't know exactly when you're going to have it. So it's like two polar opposite worlds, and it's taken me years to go from one to the other and to now blend the two. I'm so happy now that I have blended the magic with the logic, and this is how you can be incredibly powerful in everything that you do. When you have both aspects harmonized, then you are unstoppable. And I believe that the biggest genius on this planet had this gift of being able to combine logic and magic. The Einsteins of this world, all the other that were able to think outside the box, but then had the methodology and what the knowledge to be able to prove it or evidence what their genius ideas was. And this is actually how my intuition works. I have the idea first. I used to do that as a lawyer. I would have the idea first, and only after, when I did the research, was my idea confirmed. It wasn't because I did the research that I came across the idea that helped my client, if that makes any sense. So you have no guarantees because you don't even know what the outcome is going to be of the action that you take. It's like this big mystery. It's like this big unknown that you have to embrace. It takes us completely out of our comfort zone. It will never happen that you will have the reassurance before you commit. So you have to step into faith. Now, faith and business are not actually two aspects that people combine necessarily together or think about together. But I think that there needs to be some aspect. And what I mean by faith, I don't mean something religious. I just mean having the confidence to trust something that you don't have a proof for, or you don't have evidence, or someone that's never done before. And I can see the link with how I used to work as a lawyer. I was always put on files that I had never done before, and no one else had ever done that before either. In the early days of my work anyway. So it was, I had to use my intuition because nobody had done it before. So trusting, and the thing is, it's not so much trusting your intuition, it's trusting yourself, trusting that you're receiving this intuition, that you're spot on. Now, one of the things that you need to do, first you need to commit to yourself and say, I'm going to trust myself. And then you need to distinguish between intuition and fear. And we'll come to it in a minute. But the very first thing that you need to do is to stop putting other people's opinions above your own intuition. You will always have an expert or someone who you believe is more qualified than you, who will say something that contradicts that intuitive hit that you had. And the sad thing is, if you put them on a pedestal, if you put their advice above your own, then you might actually miss on a golden opportunity to explore fresh territory and do things in a different way. Does that make sense? Because everybody's different. All circumstances are different, and not one. This is why I love working with clients one-to-one, because there's no one approach that fits everyone. There's no cookie cutter approach to business. So trusting your intuition starts with trusting yourself. Now, I want you to take a pen and paper when you had a gut feeling that turned out to be right. Okay, and so I want you to do that. You had a gut feeling and it turned out to be right. I'm going to be quiet for about a minute so that you can dive into that. All right, now the second list I want you to write is all the instances where you did not follow that gut feeling and regretted it. So we'll give it another minute. Okay, that's a minute gone. I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my own life. There's so many instances when I had gut feelings. And I'm going to give you two examples, actually. One when I didn't follow it and I regretted it. And one where I follow it and I was so glad that I did. So the first time I did not follow my intuition, I was at a party with some friends and my husband and my son, who was back then, I think, about a year old, my first son. And my ex-husband didn't drive, so I had to go and get the car so that I could come and pick him up and our baby. Well, he was a toddler, but I didn't want to go to get to the car. I just didn't want. But I wanted him to come with me and to put our son in the pram and go all together. I didn't want to go on my own. But he didn't want to. He said, "You're being irrational." He sent me out on my own, and I didn't want to make a scene with my friends, so I just went. And I just had this horrible feeling. It was really, really bad, and I kept on walking. It was in Paris, in the Marais, if any of you know where it is. And within 5 minutes of me walking in that road, on that street, I got mugged. And it was an incredibly scary experience. I'm glad that I escaped unhurt. I went back to the car, and then obviously I went to pick my husband, and I wish I'd listened to my intuition, but at the same time, looking back now, it was difficult to do that without sounding completely crazy, irrational. The second instance where I followed my intuition, and I was so glad that I did, and that was actually before I got married and had kids. I was a student, and I had like a summer placement outside of Paris, and I was taking the RER to go back home. I actually had planned to go and do a big shop, Rue de Rennes. So for those of you who don't know Paris, it's in next to Montparnasse, the Montparnasse Tower, and it's a very busy commercial street where you have lots of, high street shops and everything. And I had planned to go shopping there, and suddenly, as I sat in the RER, about to get out and get, change to come out of the RER, I became incredibly tired. Like from one moment to the other, I was exhausted. So instead, I decided to go home. And literally, as I walked up the steps into the flat, I was still living with my parents, or I think I was visiting my parents, whatever. I started to hearing sirens of ambulances and police cars making a lot of noise in the street. And by the time I found out very shortly after that, sorry, I'm really a bit emotional, that there had been a massive bomb attempt on the Rue de Rennes that killed several people and injured dozens. So my life could have been completely changed from that accident, that terrorist attack. So I was so glad that I followed my intuition, which was in that time in a completely different part of my body. But actually not, it was a different manifestation. In the first, it was like this sense of dread. And the second time, it was just feeling incredibly exhausted to the point that I just had to go home. So I wonder what your experiences that you've wrote down have been like. And I would love for you to come and share them under my Facebook page. Maybe I'll put a post up for you to do that, or just to reach out to me to share, because it's so important that we acknowledge how intuitive we are. I believe that we are all intuitive. We are all born intuitive. But as I said earlier, from a very young age, we're discouraged to listen to that, what people call that irrational voice. So now that I hope you're convinced about the importance of intuition, I'd like you to go out after you listen to this podcast, or maybe you're in the right place to do that. Go buy yourself an intuition journal. That is really important when you start your journey with intuition. And I want you to write down all the weird and wonderful thoughts that pop in your mind out of the blue, okay? These are thoughts that you didn't think. Do you know what I mean? It's like when we think, we have a logical train of thought, but when we have intuition, it's completely out of the blue. It doesn't make sense, and we don't think it. So I want you to have a single entry per page, because you need to be able to go back to it later. And what I want you to write in for each entry is to just put the date, write what thought you had, and then forget it. It's probably best if you buy a really small notebook. I would say I'm showing on the video. I'm not too sure what this format is, but it's a pocket size kind of notebook that you can keep in your bag or whatever it is, or your pocket, so that you can write things down. Because intuition is a bit like a butterfly. It flies in and it'll fly away. And if you don't catch it, that's it, it's gone. I also want you to do the same with your dreams, because at the start of our journey of intuition, very often this is the time when we will get messages, because it's the time when we have the least resistance. It's the time when that thoughts can come to us that are unusual in a much easier way. But I also want you to understand the nature of dreams, so that you understand why it's not going to look like a prophecy, so to speak, if that makes any sense. Because our dreams are the space where we release emotional content from the day. So it could be that you had met with a friend that day, and maybe you had an argument. So in your dream, there will be a conflict in your dream, but at the same time, you'll get a new idea that's going to latch onto it. It's all mixed up in a bag. So try to see where there's some really clear ideas, but it will feel different from the rest of the dream, if that makes sense. I want to share with you the dream that I had when I learned to swim when I was a kid. I think I must have been 7 or 8, and I was terrified of water. I really got anxious feelings on getting close to water. The idea of learning to swim made me. I was very tense in my body with the first lesson, and then on that night, I don't know why, I had this dream that I swam beautifully, that I was really relaxed, that everything went well. And then the next day, this is exactly how it worked. All of it happened in reality. Now, you might not think that's intuition, but I think on some level, it was my wiser self that was showing me what was possible, and then it came true. So you build your confidence in your intuition by convincing yourself that you're intuitive. Because that's the thing. We don't think we're intuitive. Even me, with 10 years of practice, I mean, I've been reading tarot for people for well over 10 years. I don't do it anymore, but I used to do it in psychic fairs. This is my work. Every day I tune into people's energies, I read their Akashic records, I give them information, and I still don't trust it. Because it all feels like it's my imagination. I made it all up. But I have to say it. I've had to learn to have the courage to just say what I feel, what I get, what's given to me. This is the part that actually we're going to get to, is that step number 2, well, actually, step number 3 that is acting on your intuition. So step number 1 was to recognize how intuitive you are and do a bit of detective work. Step number 2 is to understand how your intuition works, because everybody's different and it can work in different ways at different times. I did an episode early on in this podcast about the different shades of intuition. So I recommend that you go and listen to it again, or listen to it full stop if you haven't yet. But I want to say quickly here that we have 7 psychic senses, so to speak. You can see clairvoyance, and that's the people that usually do clairvoyant readings and everybody know about. There's clairaudience, people who hear things. You can have the sense of touch. You can actually taste things that are not there. You can have feelings or sensing and signs. So it's all different shades of different things. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Clairvoyance is not necessarily what people think. Sometimes it's just the thought of an image. So, or it can be the feeling of a color. So you won't see the color, but you will feel it. This is why sometimes the distance is a bit blurred. Or it could be that you're walking around and suddenly your eyes are attracted to something, and it's almost like your eyes can't go away from that thing. So the universe is showing you something that you need to look at. Clairvoyance can work like that. Clear hearing is the same. You can hear a voice, but usually it's an internal voice, but it's slightly different from your usual internal voices. It's very rare people who actually hear sound really, really clearly, and it can happen to you once and never happen again. It's happened with my dad after he died. On the first birthday after his death, I was trying on new boots, Doc Marten boots, and my dad made a comment, and that was absolutely hilarious. And I had been waiting for him to talk to me for months, so I actually didn't expect it. I had let go completely of that expectation at that point. Now, I know it's not intuition, it was my dad talking to me, but it's the same kind of things. You can actually hear it as clear as day, but it's probably not going to be a very usual experience. And that's the reason why most people ignore their clairaudience, because they think they're supposed to hear loud and clear. They're not. It can be very, very subtle. Tasting, or smelling. Let's go with smelling, because that's a really funny one. Suppose that you were a chef and you were looking for a new way to make a recipe. You might actually smell a scent that is actually not in the room, that you're not dealing with, and that comes from nowhere. That could be your intuition telling you, use this, let's suppose it was a spice, use cinnamon. There's no cinnamon in the kitchen, and yes, you're smelling cinnamon. This is your intuition speaking to you. Tasting. Sometimes people have a metallic taste in their mouth for no reason at all. That can be another way your intuition works. Touching, you can actually feel the touch. You could maybe ask, for example, where do I need to focus on my body to heal, so whatever. And you could feel a little bit of pressure somewhere in your body that gives you the answer. So this is why I want you to be really, it's important to be aware of everything that happens, everything that you sense through your physical senses, because that's how your intuition can speak to you as well. Or it can be a feeling, as I described earlier with my experience in the RER. I felt tired all of a sudden, and that was my intuition. I have a feeling my door is open. I think I might have to, I'm going to keep an eye. My kids might walk in. Pay attention, create some quiet and slow down. And this is the thing, is to pay attention, because we live in such a loud world that has so much input, so many different directions. We're pulled in all sorts of distractions. And that takes us away from our intuition. Now, the third step, which is just as important as everything else, is to act on your intuition. This is probably the most important. You will not have evidence of whether your intuition is right or not without actually acting on it. Or, well, I suppose that's not completely true, because I had mine by being mugged. I was shown that actually my intuition was right, but this is more rare case. I think usually when you use your intuition in a positive way, you will only know what benefits you could reap from that if you act on it. It's a bit like the sat nav, the satellite navigation system for cars. If your car is not moving, you don't get directions. So you have to take the first step, even if it's a small one, and then the next one, and the next one. And the more you move in the direction, the more you show that you're willing to go in that direction, the more instructions you will get. And then the last step is to learn to deal with your fears and to differentiate between fear and intuition. Now, intuition, even if it's negative, will feel good. Does that make sense? In the sense that you know that it's there. You don't feel panic. You don't feel like people describe when they've had intuitive hits that have saved their lives. I mean, I was recently listening to a lady who said that she followed her intuition, which enabled her to walk away from a bomb in a train station. So a little bit like me with the Rue de Rennes. And she said that everything became slow motion, and she walked away and she felt incredibly peaceful. So that's one indication. It always feels useful, uplifting, whatever it is, even if it's negative. And it's but for some intuition hits that you get, as soon as you think about it, your fears are going to try and stop you from doing it. It's a little bit like what Mel Gibson describes in her 5-second rule book, which I absolutely love and encourage you to listen to. I listened as an audio. That's why I'm talking about her book as something you listen to. She says, when you get inspiration, which is the same as intuition, if you don't act on it within 5 seconds, then your analytical mind will come and try to destroy it, because it takes you out of your comfort zone, and your reptile brain wants to keep you safe. And anything they don't know, that the reptile brain can't grasp or completely control, feels like a threat. So this is what I want you to do. Please follow the 4 steps. Tell me how useful it was, and come and share your stories on my page about what's happened from doing that. Or even a comment under the show notes, because I will be writing show notes for this episode on my website, which is called icanhelpyouthrive.com. And feel free to reach out to me if you would like help in deepening your intuition, trusting it more to the level where you can actually feel confident to act on it on a daily basis, because this is something that I love to help my clients with. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I will talk to you next week. Bye for now.